I'm Barbara Cochran with my co-host Dr. Gene Dorio, who's on his way on your hometown station, AM 1220 KHTS. This is a show for, about, and by seniors, giving information to enhance one's quality of life. And our guest this morning is Richard Szerman of Reality One Group, and you're going to be talking about foreclosures and loan modifications.
How to get people's payments down so they can afford to stay in their houses.
Very good. Okay, and in the second half of the hour, we will be speaking with Rick Ferrante of Home Care Services. Welcome, Richard. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm very well. It's actually Realty One Group is the company I'm with. Not Reality. That's down the street. They sell
is
other stuff there.
Is that what I said? Reality?
Everybody does it. They sell other stuff there. We just do
goodness.
real estate. Reality would be better, but we just do real estate.
But that is reality.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It is.
Especially if you have to make loan modifications because you can't afford your high.
Well, let's start with what a loan modification is, because there's often misunderstanding about that. That's when you go to your bank and you ask them, and you can ask less forcefully or more forcefully, depending on your position, to lower your interest rate and thus your mortgage payment, and sometimes reduce the principal as well, to enable you to stay in your home. And there are lots of rules with loan modifications that are, we'll call them benefits, I suppose, that apply when you're over 55 years old. So there's an awful lot of stuff that you can do because what we're trying to do is keep seniors in their homes so they're not forced to sell them.
Absolutely.
Because what we see all the time is somebody gets to a certain age and maybe they've retired or they're not working as much anymore, they're not making as much, and so they're having a hard time making that mortgage payment. And most people think, even if, especially if they've had a loan for 20 years, that they're locked in and they can't change that at all. And that's simply not the case. We do it all the time, and I get yelled at for forgetting to say this all the time. We do it for free. Talk about bearing the headline. We absolutely do it for free and have for quite some time. We're very adept at it. All people need to do is give us a call, but we're very, very good at getting banks to voluntarily agree to reduce the interest rate and thus reduce the payment, and in many cases reduce the principal. We've been very successful. I can tell you about one case off the top of my head. We had one we're working on right now where unfortunately, husband and wife, and unfortunately she's been having some problems. She took a pretty serious fall and hurt her head pretty badly, and she's got some brain injury, unfortunately, and she's recovering, but very, very slowly. But obviously she can't work under those circumstances and hasn't for quite some time. And the bank's attitude...
Are these seniors you're talking to?
They are. And the bank's attitude is that, well, if you can't make the payment, then, they're going to seize the house. And we have a somewhat different attitude, to say the least. And so what we've been able to do with that, without boring with all the detail, what we've been able to do with that is get the bank to stop the foreclosure proceedings immediately. We got the bank to agree, because of their poor behavior, to reduce the principal that's owed by about $50,000, which is extremely helpful.
Wow.
And now she'll have a place to come home to, and she recovers. Now, they more than likely will have to sell the house in any case because it's two-story, and her moving up and down is a whole other problem. But at the very least, now they're in control of their future and not the bank. They have the ability to decide when or if they choose to sell that property or whether they choose to stay there. And this is stuff we do for free. We've done it for years. We're very, very happy to help. And I don't know, I'm very, very excited that this couple is able to stay in their home when I hope to say that without our involvement, they may not have been able to. So,
wow, that's kudos to you.
Thank you.
It really is, because it's so important, especially for seniors, to be able to stay in their home, because they don't want to go live with relatives.
If they have that,
if they have that option,
sure,
that's very true.
Have that.
That's very true.
So they were in this particular couple's case. They were looking at, and they did get a decent amount in retirement, not enough to live lavishly on, but certainly enough to survive on if the rest of their bills are drill down a little bit, particularly their mortgage, because they were looking at a situation where they would have wound up in some sort of state-run managed care facility, or they would have drained everything they've got and gone into a slightly better managed care facility, but it wouldn't have been in their own homes. And now that's no longer an issue. Now we managed to get that fixed for them.
That's wonderful. Now, I wanted to ask you about two-story homes,
Sure.
And I don't think couples realize, if they plan to stay in their home for any length of time, that as you get older, you have problems walking up the stairs.
Fair enough, yeah. Well, there's a there's a myth that two-story homes, I was actually talking about this the other day, that two-story homes are somehow less desirable than single-story homes. And it really just depends on sort of where you're at in your life. But if your plan is, if you're in your, say, your 40s or even your 50s, and you're planning on buying the house and living there forever, then you need to give some thought to, the second story being a problem for you. And in Santa Clarita, it's interesting. When it comes to properties under 1,500 square feet, between, let's say, 1,000 and 1,500 square feet, there are many one-story options, because if it's a house that size, it's going to naturally be one-story. But we have a serious lack of large single-family homes that are single-story. There are a couple of tracts that have them, but they are very, very few and far between. If I were a developer in this town, I'm not, I'm just a realtor, but if I were a developer, I'd look very seriously at building large single-story homes, because that is definitely a marketplace that we need, that we really don't have.
Well, it's interesting. The home that we have now, it's a flat roof house, but it was a square with the atrium in the middle.
Oh, sure.
And it had a kitchen
Probably
and
in
a
Canyon
small dining room. No, it's in Newhall.
Oh, okay.
In the Princess Tract.
Oh, very good. Okay.
Across from Friendly Valley.
Okay, very good.
But it had the very tiny kitchen and dining room, and a long living room with 1, 2, 3 very, very small bedrooms. What we did is we turned the atrium into the living room.
Sure, roofed it.
That's right, and put a fireplace in there. Then we took the living room and made 2 rooms out of it.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that model, as a matter of fact. I'm very familiar with that tract. Lots of people have done that because there's your needs. What's nice about that particular house, we have some that definitely qualify for this in this town. They're easy enough to sort of, I'm sure it wasn't inexpensive for you, but easy enough to rejigger things around to suit your lifestyle if it's got that basic floor plan that you can work with to begin with. That's another one of the disadvantages of the 2-story house. If you're having trouble getting up and down the stairs, I mean, outside of maybe a chairlift or something like that, although we do have a company locally that actually, strangely, they're world renowned, and they happen to be right here in Valencia, that makes chairlifts and things of that nature. But those are expensive, and they're obtrusive, unfortunately.
Well, but they are a necessity
if you're in a 2-story house.
If you have a problem getting up and down the stairs.
Sure, absolutely.
Now, Frank Kleeman, who recently passed away, he was having problems going up the stairs, and so was his wife. They decided, we need a chairlift. And it was the best thing they ever did.
Sure.
And we have another friends of ours, Carolyn and Lee Lotus. They did the same thing. And it's been a lifesaver.
Although you should know, unfortunately, because, and it's just, they are very well designed these days, and they certainly do the job well.
They are expensive.
But they are expensive, and they are very obtrusive. If you're, like, let's say you're a young couple, and this you've got a chairlift in the house, and they're looking to sell it, and a young couple comes to look at it, their first question is going to be, what's it going to take to remove that? They'll play with it because they think it's neat. And after about 15 minutes of playing with it, it's how do I get this thing out of here? Because unfortunately, they're not terribly attractive. And for most people, they are not a value-added part of a property, even though you spend a lot of money.
Well, that's probably true, but if you plan to stay in your home,
you have no choice.
And you can't get up the stairs where your bedrooms are, then you invest in one of those.
But you live in fear because if there's a power outage.
Well, most of them have backups that are pretty.
Yes,
they're the
but you got to think about the power outage. That is it going to work or not?
Oh,
and that would be your greatest fear.
Sure.
So get a single story home.
Yeah, it's going to be better all the way around.
That is senior friendly, considered senior friendly, not a 2-story or a 3-story.
Yeah.
Even with an elevator in it, it's still scary.
Yeah, we don't have a whole lot of houses with elevators, unfortunately.
Not too many.
I would think that would be extremely expensive to
there
put
are a few
in.
Custom houses, but there are a few. But you're not going to find an elevator in a tract house by and large. No builder's going to shell out for that.
Basement to 5th floor.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
Not basements either. But no, in any case, so yeah. In addition to whenever we have someone who comes in, and we're talking about senior housing issues, depending on what their situation is, we're pretty adept at handling them. Sometimes it's a loan modification to save the house. Sometimes we're looking to buy a house, which is when we're talking about 1-story versus 2-story and the stuff that goes with that. Taxes are a big part of what people consider when they're looking at buying or selling a house, particularly when they're selling. And there are a number of benefits for seniors that people sometimes forget to take advantage of. There are, I think, 3 different propositions that have been passed that are now law in California. Some have been here for a while that allow you to sell and actually keep the money, whether you don't have to reinvest it, whereas if you're under 55, you do.
Capital gains.
Yeah, that's capital gains. There's also a number of tax things in addition to Prop 13 that you can move the tax basis from one house to another. So if you bought a house in the Santa Clarita Valley, for example, in 1968 for $17,000, your tax basis is extraordinarily low. You'd like to maintain that when you move to another property. property. And there's some rules. There's fairly arcane as to between counties and between various cities and things. But the point is to know that that is an option that you should investigate. And I find a lot of times with people, particularly elderly clients who are selling a property, they just pay no attention to that, and then they get the tax bill, which is massive, and suddenly your $200,000 or $300,000 that you're taking out of your house that you're going to plan to live on gets chopped up quite a bit, because a lot of that winds up going, a high percentage of that winds up going to taxes. Mm-hmm. With even just a small bit of planning, you can avoid most, if not all, of that.
So would you be in favor of legislation that might spare some of our seniors who are in a category and risk of losing their home because they can't pay their tax?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's pretty rare that the assessor's office is going to come after somebody soon, because the assessor's office isn't typically going to take action as far as foreclosing on a property for somewhere on the order of 5 or 6 years or even longer. Mm-hmm. The greater danger is if you have a mortgage on the house, and most people do, the vast majority of people. I think in the Santa Clarita Valley, we're over 98% of people have mortgages.
Really?
It's a ridiculously high number. I'm surprised it's 10%. Well, how many people do you know who don't have a mortgage?
I don't.
Well, okay, there's 2.
I'm in the 2%.
But you're in the 2%.
Yeah.
I will tell you, I'm a little bit younger than the rest of the room here, and not much, but I'm a little bit younger than the rest of the room, and I don't know of anyone who doesn't have a mortgage. I mean, every one of the friends I've got, everyone who's my age or older or younger, they all have mortgages. Southern California.
Don't. Well, not a lot, but a few do.
It also depends on when they bought their house. When the average sales price in this town was $20,000, and you bought the house, lived there for 20 years, you could pay it off. The average sales price right now is a little over $500,000. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Very different environment.
When we moved into the house that I'm in now, when I was married to my first husband, we took over a $21,000 mortgage.
Yeah.
We gave them $1,000 down, and that was after the, was it the 71 earthquake?
Mm-hmm.
Was it
yes,
71?
February 9th.
Yeah, they got the necessary structural damage money to fix that, and they also got more money to fix things that they didn't fix. They used that extra money to buy a new house.
Oh, sure.
And that's how we got in for $1,000.
But
we gave them $1,000.
If you bought your house in 71, I was born the year you bought your house. And I will tell you, there is no one that I know of in my generation or younger, and substantially older as well, who doesn't have a mortgage. They're absolutely commonplace. It's extremely rare that you run across a seller who doesn't have a mortgage, or a buyer who's got so much cash accumulated that they're going to buy a house without having to get a mortgage. You see that with investors, but you very rarely see that with anyone who's moving into a house to stay there. So mortgages you have to deal with them. They are.
That's
what they
very
are.
true.
And if you're not careful with it, especially if you're a senior, they can eat you. It's sort of like we built this monster so that we could fuel the economy, and it's eating us. That's what happens very much with mortgages, unfortunately. The mortgage system, the banks will tell you that it has to be this way because otherwise the payments would be too expensive. But the entire mortgage system is, in my opinion, corrupt. It is to its very core. I put it this way to clients all the time, just to kind of cut through it. What I say all the time is, if I were to loan you money the way a bank will loan you money for a mortgage, I'd go to prison for racketeering. But if a bank does it, it's mortgage banking, it's fine. The only type of loan is, we'll think about how mortgages work. Mortgages are always called front-loaded, which means that the majority of the bank's profit they're going to collect in their first 5 to 10 years.
Oh, absolutely.
When you take out a 30-year mortgage, you're really not effectively paying off that house in years 1 through 10. You're really not paying that house off in years 10 through 20 either. It's years 20 to 30. Now, why is that statistic important? Because you need to know the follow-up information, which is, in Southern California, the average person buys and sells every 7 years. The average person in Southern California refinances their house every 3 years.
Really?
People don't understand the time quotient. What happens is they'll say, I've got a mortgage at 6% and my payment is X, and I'm going to refinance my house, and I'm going to get my house down to 4%, and my payment will go down by $200 a month, which is great, but how long have you had that mortgage? If you've had that mortgage for 10 minutes, then go ahead. But if you've had that mortgage for 10 years, you might want to think about that very, very seriously, because you're finally getting to the point where you're starting to make a dent with every payment, even though the amount hasn't changed. Less of it's going toward the bank and more of it's going toward principal, although there's still plenty going to the bank. So you've got to consider that. And I think, unfortunately, people are so used to just having a mortgage payment, because as we talked about, everyone seems to have one. Everyone has one. That they become more payment sensitive. They don't understand that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. The object here is to pay off the house at some point. People just don't think in terms of paying off their houses, and that's getting worse as time's going on. I'll give you another interesting statistic that's a little terrifying. In my generation, on average, we spend about 50% of our income on housing. And you're not supposed to be able to get a loan unless you have a ratio that's lower than 48%, but that's a whole other story. The reality is most of the people who are so let's say 35 to 55 right now, about 50% of their income thereabouts is going toward housing, whether it's rent or whether it's mortgage. In my grandparents' generation, that number was about 25, 26%. I'm very, very worried about what it's going to be like for my daughter's generation. I have a 10-year-old daughter at home, and that number continues to rise. The amount of income that is being put into housing, overall income that is being put into housing versus other things, is terrifying. It's gone up faster than everything else. It's gone up faster than the gold standard. It's gone up faster than bread. It's gone up faster than everything else. And I'm in real estate, so as the numbers get higher, that's good for me and good for the other people that I work with. But I don't know that it's good for the consumer. And their prices are going to rise because there's consumer demand out there. Mortgages are what fuel that demand, and there's nothing wrong with that. But surely we can find a more stable system for doing mortgages. They don't have to be front-loaded the way they are. They don't have to be 30 years or now 40 years. This idea that once a bank has you on that treadmill, they have almost a voluntary version, if there is such a thing, of indentured servitude. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. So few people pay off their mortgages, and so many people have mortgages that they think are just going to run forever, that they don't understand that the object of the exercise is to pay it off.
That's right.
So how do we get around that? I mean,
there are a number of things you can do. I'm a big fan of 15-year mortgages. I heard Fred Arnold was doing a bit on it the other day. May have been an archive show. I wasn't sure. I only caught the tail end of it. But 15-year mortgages are excellent, lower term. Or you can do what I advise clients to do all the time, which go ahead and get the nice normal 30-year fixed, but then use what's called an amortization schedule. And you can get them all over the place. I recommend a website called bankrate.com. They've got a great calculator for this. Because what you'll find in most cases, a few extra $100 a month going directly toward principal will reduce how quickly you pay off the house. I had a house, the first house I ever bought, and I got to thank my mom for this because she made me do this. I fought her on it, and she was right. She's probably going to enjoy hearing that. I paid, I'll give you the numbers. I paid $143,000 for this house way back when you could buy a house in Santa Clarita for that. And my payment was about $1,000 a month. But by paying $1,400 a month, I paid that house off in about 9 years. So because I paid that house off, when I sold it, I had the money to go out of that to do other things. That's what's led me to the career that I have. But knowing how to use an amortization schedule, just because you're qualified for $2,500 a month doesn't necessarily mean you should go buy a house that costs you $2,500 a month. Buy a house that costs you $2,000 a month, send in $25,000, and use that extra $500 for principal. The key to remember here when dealing with this, and it's very simple, you can only be charged interest on the amount that you owe. Say that again. You can only be charged interest on the amount that you owe. So if you're reducing that principal, if you're reducing the amount that you owe, the interest that you're being charged will also, the rate will stay the same, but the actual amount that you're being charged will go down. And again, this is not revolutionary. I didn't come up with this. This is not like it was my idea or anything. This is all fairly common knowledge, but you're butting up against a multi-billion-dollar industry, that being the mortgage industry, who absolutely does not want people to pay attention to this. It's sort of like the Wizard of Oz. Don't look behind the curtain. They don't want people to think about paying off their houses. They don't want people to think about short-term loans. The interest rates are also lower. When you take out a 15-year loan, it's going to be a substantially lower interest rate than on a 30-year loan, and an even lower interest rate than on a 40-year loan. What banks are migrating to now is what they want people to do is take out 40-year mortgages, adjustables, if they can get you to do it.
Really?
That's where that is where that industry is heading. We're seeing more and more of that.
40-year loan?
Well, this is the same thinking that led to the crash to begin with. The idea was, how do we here at the bank both maximize our profits and drive down the payment for the consumer? That's where negative amortization came from. That's where interest-only loans came from. That is the kind of thinking. And the idea, it's always wrapped up in this idea that it's good for the consumer because we're reducing the amount that they're paying every month. But that's nonsense. If you put somebody in a position where they're never going to realistically pay off their house, who are you helping other than yourselves at the bank? It's interesting. The largest financial institutions that we have, particularly the big foreign mortgages, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, B of A, Wells Fargo, Chase, and Citi, are, to my way of thinking, and I get in trouble for saying this, but the game that they are running is rigged. And it's not supposed to be a game. Your mortgage is not supposed to be a game of chance. It's not supposed to work that way. And when you have any inkling as to how the mortgage industry actually works, it's terrifying. Because what we've seen people shift from, the idea that I'm going to pay my house off in 10 years to the idea that I'm going to pay it off in 15 years to 30 years, and now they're looking at 40. And you're going to start seeing over the next decade, you are going to see more and more 40-year product come out of the banks. That is going to happen. And more people are going to sign off because I want to own a house, but I can't afford $3,000 a month, just to use random numbers. And if I can't afford $3,000 a month on 30-year, well, why don't I take a higher interest rate, do a 40-year, and now my payment will be a little bit lower, usually on about $2,500 a month. So I'm saving $500 a month. Well, no, you're not. You're increasing the amount of payments you're making for 10 years. But again, if you're not thinking about paying the house off, if you're only thinking thinking about the payment, the idea I will always have a mortgage payment, so I just want that to be as low as possible. It's really just another version of rent. It's just instead of renting from a landlord, you're renting from, B of A or whoever it is.
Well, let me ask you something.
Sure,
Have you ever come across someone who is buying a house and they pay only the interest?
Yeah, interest-only loans.
Most people do that.
Yeah, that's a horrible idea.
98%.
Well, that's what led interest-only loans. There are three categories of loans. There's your standard loan, which you're paying off, called fully amortized. It's amortized over 30 years, and it's on a sliding scale, but at least it's amortized. There's interest-only, which is you're paying only the interest. In other words, the bank's profit. You're not actually hitting the principal at all, which is very foolish. And then there's negative amortization, where every month that goes by, you owe more than the month prior. Now, two of those categories of loans, negative amortization and interest only, are a horrendously bad idea. Those are what led to the crash. Those loans never should have been done. What happens with the banks, I've observed, is they'll take some very little-known financial product that's meant for a very specific purpose. Negative amortization loans. If you're just going to buy a house, fix it up to resell it, you're only going to own it for a few months. A negative amortization loan might not be such a bad idea for you. But if you're planning on owning this house for 5-10 years, that's a horrendously bad idea. So they'll take a little-known financial product. They'll say, this is really profitable, and we sort of discovered this. We're going to market this to everybody. They push it out there as if it's what they should be doing, and people wind up losing their homes because they don't know what they're getting into.
So, Richard, a good way that you could help our seniors who are listening to the show, some of them have a mortgage and they're 60, 70, maybe even 80 years old. Some of them who are 80 and 90 years old, they have sons and daughters who are listening to this show also.
Sure.
Wouldn't advice that they could come to you about just to discuss these issues about paying these loans off at a quicker way, looking at what the loan agreement is, what their mortgage is like, and how they can get over and above that in maybe 5 to 15 years?
Sure. It's what we do on a daily basis. I take calls all the time from people who aren't my clients who are just asking me questions about things, and I'm happy to answer them. It's not a problem for me. I mean, I think most people are pretty bright. They just don't know the information they should be looking for. And as long as you kind of lay kind of the basis for them, they'll figure it out on their own. It's not, would you rather pay more or less? Well, less. Okay, but do we mean less this minute, or do we mean less over time? Because when you look at the whole pictures, that great expression, seeing the forest for the trees, when you're looking at the entire forest and not just the one tree, you're going to get a better feel for what's going on out there. And again, none of this stuff is revolutionary. None of it's all that difficult. It's certainly not hard to understand. It's just a matter of sort of how you're thinking about it.
Well, I think you also have to have someone like you to help you understand.
Well, my wife will tell you there is no one like me, unfortunately. But I'm always.
Does she understand you?
She's a lot smarter than me, so yes, she absolutely understands me. It's not. She gets mad when I say that. It's not that I'm saying I'm not smart. I'm brilliant. She's just smarter than I am. That's all. I'm okay with that.
Well, how would someone get in touch with you, Richard, if they wanted to?
The easiest thing is just to call me. I'm at Realty One, and you can call me. A partner and I own the company. You can call me anytime you'd like. I'm at 661-714-1400. That's my cell phone. And I'm going to get in trouble for this as well, but you can call me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at that line.
You sound like a doctor now.
Well, yeah, what I do is not as important, although some people sometimes my clients think it is. It's certainly not life and death for me. But no, I want to be a resource, and I like being a resource to people. I enjoy my job a lot. I've got a head full of what is otherwise useless information. If it's about housing, I'm extraordinarily interesting all of a sudden.
Well, that's your cell phone.
That's my cell. The office line is
Realty.
661.
I said realty, not reality. Realty.
Yeah, reality. If we could sell reality, I'd do a lot better. No, Realty One. The phone number at the office is 661-253-3000. Again, that's 661-253-3000. And just call us up anytime. All the agents that are at the company are all excellent. They're all very, very good at what they do. We're very kind of picky as to who we hire at Realty One. It's nice to be in that position, so we like to think we've got sort of the best of the best there. And there's not a person there who doesn't know what we're talking about today, doesn't know how an amortization schedule works, or doesn't know how to get somebody out of a 30-year mortgage and into a 15-year mortgage if that's more appropriate. We do not do loans, but we have an in-house lender who's quite good. We have other people around town who are quite good. I know Fred Arnold does a lot with the station here, is very good. There are a lot of people you can go to. You just have to know to ask them the right questions. I mean, we have these resources literally at our fingertips. You just need to know that that's what you need.
Yeah, that's
Before
right.
you get yourself in trouble.
Or to get yourself out of trouble.
Yes, that's right. Well, Richard Szerman of Realty
Realty.
Realty One Group.
That's us.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you guys
Great
for having me.
I
on.
think
Great
you've
information.
shared
Thank
a
you.
lot of great information.
Happy to help anytime.
Great. And you'll come back and visit us again.
Anytime you'll have me.
Wonderful.
Thank you guys.
Thank you. I'm Barbara Cochran with my co-host, Dr. Jean Dorio, on your hometown station, AM 1220 KHTS.